The sun had almost dipped below the rooftops when Jaden left the school gym. The last echoes of bouncing basketballs faded behind him as he slung his worn-out bag over his shoulder. His white sneakers were dusty, his hoodie damp with sweat, and his heart was still racing from the final game. Practice had gone longer than usual, and now the sky was a soft grayish blue, the kind that promised a calm evening. He didn't have a car yet, so walking home had become his daily routine. It was a 15-minute walk, just long enough for him to put on his earphones and lose himself in music. Jaden loved those walks. They gave him time to think, to dream about college, and to forget about the small frustrations of the day. He waved to a neighbor who was watering her flowers and crossed the same street he crossed every afternoon. He felt completely at ease, unaware that within minutes his calm evening was about to twist into something that would stay with him forever. As he turned onto Maple Street, he noticed a police car parked at the corner. He didn't think much of it. They were often around the area, but this time as he walked past, the car started to roll slowly behind him. He pulled out one earbud, glancing over his shoulder. 2 officers were inside. The passenger was talking into a radio. The driver kept his eyes fixed on Jaden. Jaden's stomach tightened. He tried to ignore it and kept walking, but the sound of the car tires creeping along the curb followed him. He heard a quick chirp of the siren, then a voice behind him. "Hey, you there!" "Stop for a second." He froze. The voice was firm, not loud but heavy enough to cut through the quiet street. He turned slowly. The officers were stepping out now, their flashlights clipped to their belts even though there was still daylight. Jaden pulled down his hood. "Yes, sir?" he said, his voice uncertain but respectful. "Where are you coming from?" the driver asked. "Basketball practice," Jaden said, lifting the strap of his bag a little as proof. "Mind telling us your name?" "Jaden Turner." The second officer, taller and older, eyed him carefully. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks down on Pine Avenue." The officers exchanged a quick glance. The taller one said, "We got a call about someone matching your description breaking into cars near here. You sure you haven't been around those parking lots behind the school?" Jaden's pulse jumped. "No, sir. I just finished practice." "You can ask Coach, he's still there." The younger officer took a step closer. "Can we see some ID?" Jaden reached slowly into his pocket, trying to remember what his mom had told him so many times. "Keep your hands visible, speak calmly, don't argue." He pulled out his student card, but his hands were shaking just enough that the card slipped and fell. As he bent to pick it up, one of the officer's hands moved toward his belt. "Hey, hands up." "Don't move," the tall officer barked. Jaden froze mid-motion, both hands raised halfway. "It's just my school ID, sir." It fell. The younger officer looked uneasy now, his hand still resting on his holster. The street was empty except for a woman walking her dog across the road. She stopped watching. Jaden could feel her eyes on him, but she didn't say a word. "Turn around," the tall officer said. "Put your hands on your head." Jaden's throat went dry. "Sir, I didn't do anything. I'd do it now." His bag slipped from his shoulder and hit the ground. He turned slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. He heard footsteps approach, felt a rough hand grip his wrist. Panic surged through him, not from guilt but from fear. He had seen stories like this on the news. His mother had warned him again and again that sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough. The officer pulled his other arm back to cuff him. "This is just for safety," he said, though his tone didn't sound reassuring. "Please," Jaden said quietly. "I'm not resisting. Can you check my bag? My ID's in there." The younger officer hesitated. "He's just a kid," he murmured, but the older one ignored him. "Where were you at 6:15? The tall one asked, snapping one cuff closed. "Still at the gym." "You can ask Coach." "Yeah, we'll see about that." Across the street, the woman with the dog had taken out her phone. She was filming now, holding it steady. Jaden noticed but didn't say anything. His mind was racing too fast. He thought about his mom, about how she always said if something like this ever happened, stay calm, don't make sudden moves, and call her as soon as possible. But right now his phone was in his pocket, out of reach. The younger officer crouched to open Jaden's bag. Inside were his sneakers, a towel, and a half-empty water bottle. "No tools, no stolen stuff," he said quietly. The older one frowned, not ready to back down. "Still matches the description." "What description?" Jaden asked softly. "Because I'm wearing a hoodie?" The older man didn't answer. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy, filled with tension that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood at dusk. Jaden wished someone would just believe him. Then faintly from down the street came the sound of another engine, a familiar one. A dark SUV turned the corner and slowed to a stop beside the police car. The door opened quickly and out stepped a woman in a dark suit, her expression calm but fierce. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement as she approached. "Officers," she said evenly. "What's going on here?" Both men turned. "Ma'am, please step back," the tall officer said automatically. "We're in the middle of a stop." She didn't move. "You're detaining my son," she said, her tone cutting through the air like glass. Jaden looked up in relief. "Mom, stay still, baby," she said, her voice softening for a split second before turning sharp again. "I'm Agent Turner, FBI," the younger officer blinked. "You're what?" She reached into her jacket and flipped open her badge, holding it firmly so there could be no mistake. The gold emblem caught the last light of the evening. "You want to explain why 2 local officers are handcuffing a minor who's walking home from basketball practice?" Silence. The tall officer's hand dropped from his belt. The younger one stepped back, his face pale. "Ma'am, we were responding to a call." He fit the description. "What description exactly?" she asked. The taller officer cleared his throat. Male, mid-teens, dark hoodie, black backpack." That could describe half the boys at the high school, she cut in. "Did you even ask for ID?" "He reached for something and his school ID," she said coldly. "That's what he reached for." Jaden stood still, afraid to move, watching the sudden shift in their behavior. The power that had pressed down on him moments ago was gone, replaced by uncertainty and regret on their faces. One of them fumbled with the key to unlock the cuffs. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any disrespect," the younger officer said softly. "We were just doing your job," she finished for him. "Yes, but your job doesn't include assuming guilt based on appearance." The cuffs clicked open. Jaden rubbed his wrists quietly, his eyes stinging, though he wasn't sure if it was from anger or relief. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "You all right?" she asked gently. He nodded, barely speaking. The woman across the street lowered her phone but kept watching. The older officer muttered something about misunderstanding, but Agent Turner didn't respond. She turned to her son. "Get your bag," she said softly. "We're going home." As they walked toward her SUV, Jaden looked back once. The officers were still standing there, not sure what to do next. He climbed into the passenger seat, his hands still trembling. The car smelled faintly of coffee and leather, a small comfort after what had just happened. His mom started the engine but didn't drive off right away. For a long moment they sat in silence. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the road. "You okay?" she asked again. "Yeah," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. She looked at him, her expression softening. "You did everything right." "I didn't even do anything," he said, frustration breaking through his voice. "I was just walking home." "I know," she said quietly. "That's what scares me." He turned to the window, watching the reflection of red and blue lights fade behind them. "They thought I was someone else," he whispered. "They didn't see someone else," she said. "They saw what they wanted to see." Neither spoke again for a while. The SUV moved slowly down the familiar streets, past houses with porch lights glowing, past the basketball court where kids still played under fading daylight. Jaden felt the weight of the world pressing on him in a way he never had before. He wasn't sure if he wanted to cry or shout or forget it all. When they reached home, his mom parked the car and sat for another moment before turning off the engine. "You know," she said softly, "I deal with people like that every day. Good people mostly, but people who let fear guide their eyes. Fear makes mistakes." Jaden leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the car. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "I make sure this doesn't happen again, to you or anyone else if I can help it." He didn't answer. He just nodded, grateful she had shown up when she did, but still shaken that she'd needed to. As they walked into the house, the world felt a little different. Less safe, maybe, but more real. Upstairs, Jaden tossed his bag onto the floor and sank onto his bed. He could still feel the cold ring of the cuffs around his wrists, the way the officer's tone had changed the moment his mother flashed her badge. It wasn't just relief he felt now. It was confusion, anger, and something else, something heavier. He didn't have words for it yet. Downstairs, his mother sat quietly at the kitchen table, typing a report on her laptop. Every keystroke echoed through the house like a promise that this night wouldn't just disappear. And outside, under the dim streetlight, two officers sat in their car, staring straight ahead, the echo of their mistake following them into the dark. The morning after the incident felt strangely quiet. Jayden woke up early even though he hadn't slept much. His mind kept replaying everything that had happened, the flashing lights, the voices, the cuffs, and then his mom standing there calm but furious. It all felt like a dream, except the uneasy feeling in his chest reminded him it was real. Downstairs, he could hear his mom in the kitchen, talking softly on the phone. The smell of coffee filled the house, mixed with the faint scent of toast. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while, staring at the floor, then finally got up and went down. She looked up as he entered. Her expression softened instantly. "Morning, baby. You want some breakfast?" He shook his head. "Not really hungry." She hung up the call and sighed. "I understand. But you should eat something before school." He hesitated. "Do I have to go?" She looked at him for a moment, then set her mug down. "I think it might help you feel normal again." "You didn't do anything wrong, Jay. You shouldn't have to hide." He knew she was right. But the thought of walking down the same streets, past the same corner where it all happened, made his stomach tighten. Still, he nodded quietly. They sat together in silence for a few minutes. The clock ticked. Outside, the sky was bright but dull, like it didn't know whether to be cheerful or serious. "Who were you talking to?" Jayden asked after a while. "Internal Affairs," she said. "I filed a report about what happened. They're reviewing the body cam footage from those officers." He nodded slowly. "Will they get in trouble?" "I don't know yet. The system moves slow," she said softly. "But it moves." Jayden stared at his hands, remembering how helpless he had felt. "It's crazy, Mom. They didn't even ask questions. They just assumed." She reached over and took his hand. "That's what bias does. It turns fear into action before facts." He looked up at her, seeing the tiredness in her eyes. She looked strong on the outside, but he could tell it had shaken her too. By the time he got to school, the story had already spread. Someone had uploaded the video online the night before. A few kids had shared it on social media, and it was already being talked about by everyone. When he walked down the hall, heads turned. Some whispered. Others looked at him with sympathy, some with curiosity. His best friend, Nathan, ran up to him by the lockers. "Dude, I saw the video." "That was you?" Jayden nodded. "Yeah, that's messed up, man. You okay?" "I guess," Jayden said. "Just tired. You're like famous now. Everyone's talking about it." "I don't want to be famous for that," Jayden muttered, closing his locker. Nathan looked awkward for a second. "Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean it like that." Jayden forced a small smile. "It's okay." Classes dragged on and Jayden could barely focus. Every time he looked at his phone, there was another notification. Messages from people he barely knew. Some saying they supported him, others asking what really happened. Even local reporters had messaged him online asking for comments. He ignored them all. By lunchtime, he couldn't take the stairs anymore. He went outside and sat by himself on the bleachers near the field. The air was warm and kids were laughing somewhere behind him, but all he could hear was that voice in his head telling him to stop, to turn around, to put his hands up. He didn't notice when the school counselor, Mrs. Hayes, walked up. She sat down a few steps below him. "Hey, Jayden," she said softly. He blinked, coming back to the present. "Oh, hey, mind if I sit?" He shrugged. "Sure." She sat there for a moment before speaking again. "I heard about what happened. I'm sorry you had to go through that." He didn't respond right away. "It's whatever," he said finally. "I'm fine. You don't sound fine." He looked away, watching a bird hop along the fence. "It's just weird. Everyone keeps looking at me like I'm some kind of victim. I don't want that." "I get that," she said quietly. "But you also don't have to pretend it didn't bother you." He rubbed his hands together. "I thought if you were polite and did everything right, you'd be safe." "My mom always said that, but I did, and it still happened." Mrs. Hayes nodded slowly. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see, not what's actually there." "That's not your fault," Jayden didn't answer. He just sat there, letting the silence stretch between them. That evening, when he got home, the living room TV was on. His mom was sitting on the couch watching a local news report. The screen showed blurred footage of the incident, the same video that had gone viral online. Jayden stopped in the doorway. "They're showing it on TV now?" Yeah, she said. They called me earlier for a statement. I declined. He sat beside her. On the screen, the anchor was talking about racial profiling and community concerns. Jaden watched himself standing there in the video, his hands up, his face tense. It felt strange seeing it from the outside. His mom turned off the TV. You okay watching that? He nodded slowly. Just feels weird. Like that's not even me. She turned toward him. It is you. But it's also something bigger than you. That video's gonna make people talk, and that's important. Talk about what? He asked softly. How scared I looked? No, she said. How wrong it was that you had to look scared. He didn't know what to say. For a moment, they just sat there, the quiet of the house pressing around them. Then the doorbell rang. His mom got up, straightened her shirt, and opened the door. Two men stood there. One was a police captain, the other an officer from internal review. They introduced themselves politely and asked to speak with her. Jaden stayed on the couch listening as they talked in the hallway. The captain's voice was calm but formal. Agent Turner, we wanted to personally apologize for last night's incident. The department takes this very seriously. I'm glad to hear that, she said, her tone measured. But apologies don't erase what my son went through. Of course, the captain said. We're reviewing procedures and planning bias training sessions for the force. The officers involved have been placed on temporary leave while we investigate. Jaden peeked from the couch and saw the men standing awkwardly by the door. His mom stood tall, professional, but he could see the steel in her eyes. After they left, she came back and sat down beside him again. They're investigating, she said simply. Will that change anything? He asked. I hope so, she said quietly. But even if it doesn't, I'll keep pushing. That night, Jaden scrolled through his messages again. Among the flood of comments, one stood out, from a stranger. It read, Thank you for staying calm. My son went through something similar. You gave me hope. He read it twice, then put his phone down. For the first time since it happened, he didn't feel completely alone. The next few days were a blur of attention. News vans parked outside the school for interviews. His mom was asked to speak on local radio but declined, saying she didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. She focused on her work, but Jaden could tell she was restless. Always on her phone, sending emails, talking to colleagues in law enforcement. One evening, after dinner, she finally said, There's going to be a community meeting next week. They're inviting families to talk about police relations. I think we should go, Jaden frowned. I don't want to talk in front of everyone. You don't have to, she said gently. But being there matters. People need to see your face. It reminds them this isn't just a story, it's someone's life. He thought about that. He still didn't want to go, but part of him understood what she meant. That night, lying in bed, he couldn't sleep again. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut kept replaying in his head. But this time he also saw his mom's face when she stepped out of the SUV. Strong, unshaken, fearless. He realized she wasn't just his mother. She was someone who had spent years standing up for others. The next morning, when she asked again if he wanted to go to the meeting, he said yes. On the day of the meeting, the community center was packed. Neighbors, local leaders, parents, and even some of the officers were there. The atmosphere was serious but hopeful. Jaden sat beside his mom, watching as people shared their stories. Some angry, some emotional, all honest. When it was his mom's turn to speak, she stood up slowly. The room went quiet. She began by saying, I'm not here as an FBI agent tonight. I'm here as a mother. Her voice was steady, filled with quiet strength. What happened to my son wasn't just about one mistake. It was about fear. Fear that sees color before character. And that's something we all have to face no matter what uniform we wear. Jaden listened, feeling something shift inside him. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was understanding. Understanding that silence wouldn't change anything. As the meeting ended, several people came up to his mom to thank her. A few even shook Jaden's hand. One older man said, You handled yourself like a young man should, with dignity. Don't ever lose that. On the way home, the air felt lighter somehow. His mom smiled faintly as she drove. You did good just being there, she said. Jaden looked out the window, the city lights passing by. For the first time in days, he felt like maybe something good could come from what happened. Maybe his story would make someone think twice next time. And as the car turned down their quiet street, he realized that even though the fear hadn't completely gone, he wasn't running from it anymore. He was facing it. just like his mom always had. The following week brought changes Jaden never expected. What started as a quiet neighborhood incident had turned into a story that people across the city were talking about. The video was still circulating online, but now it wasn't just about anger. It had sparked real conversations, at schools, at city offices, and even within the police department itself. His mom didn't talk about it much at home, but Jaden could tell things were moving behind the scenes. She was constantly on calls, her voice calm but firm, often discussing words like policy, training, and accountability. He didn't fully understand all of it, but he knew she was pushing for something bigger than an apology. One morning, while he was getting ready for school, she knocked on his door. "You're going to be late," she said, but her voice had that tone, the one she used when something serious was on her mind. He looked up. "What's wrong?" She smiled faintly. "Nothing wrong, just there's going to be a meeting at police headquarters today. They're inviting community members to talk about reforms. I'll be there, and they've asked if you want to come too." Jaden froze halfway through tying his shoe. "Me? Why me?" "Because you were the one it happened to," she said simply. "They need to see the human side of this, not just a report or a video." He hesitated. The idea of sitting in a room full of police officers made his chest tighten. But the way she looked at him, strong, proud, expectant, made him nod. "Okay," he said quietly. That afternoon they drove downtown together. The city felt bigger than usual, full of motion and noise. Jaden sat in silence most of the ride, watching the buildings pass by. His mom's hands were steady on the wheel. When they reached the station, the lobby was filled with reporters, officers, and community leaders. Cameras flashed. His mom gave her name at the front desk, and they were led to a conference room. Inside, several officers were already seated, along with city officials and a few local activists. Jaden recognized the police captain from the night they came to apologize. The two officers who had stopped him weren't there, but he could feel their presence in the air. As the meeting began, people took turns speaking, some angry, some thoughtful, all serious. Jaden listened quietly as one man talked about his own experience being stopped unfairly. Another woman spoke about her son and how she feared for him every time he went out. Then the captain spoke. "We know mistakes were made," he said, "and we're committed to changing how we operate. We're implementing new training programs and reviewing our stop-and-search procedures." His words were careful, practiced. Jaden could tell he meant well, but it didn't sound like enough. After a pause, his mom raised her hand. "With all due respect," she said, her tone calm but sharp, "training helps, but mindset matters more. If your officers don't unlearn the fear that drives their assumptions, nothing changes." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to her. She continued, "I've worked in law enforcement for over 15 years. I know how hard the job is, but it's harder for those who have to prove their innocence before they're even asked their name. My son is 16. He did everything right that night, and still he was treated like a threat." Jaden sat there watching her speak, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. She wasn't just defending him. She was teaching them something they had probably never been forced to face. When she finished, the captain nodded slowly. "Agent Turner, you're right. We've failed to see the emotional impact these encounters leave behind. I can't change the past, but I promise we'll do better." Then, unexpectedly, one of the younger officers stood up from the back. "I was the one who opened his bag that night," he said quietly. "I want to apologize publicly. I saw he was scared, and I still didn't stop what was happening." "I should have," Jaden blinked in surprise. The room went still. His mom looked at the officer, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "Owning up is the first step to growth." The captain nodded again. "We'll make sure this moment leads to real change," he said. "Starting today." The meeting ended after an hour, but the conversations lingered in the hallway. Reporters tried to get quotes, but Jaden's mom refused to make it a show. She just took her son's hand and said, "Let's go home." Outside, the evening light glowed warm against the city buildings. Jaden walked beside her in silence, still processing what had just happened. "Do you think they meant it?" he finally asked. She sighed. "Some of them did. Some probably didn't. Change doesn't happen in one meeting, Jay. It's a process." He nodded slowly. "But it's a start, right?" She smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's a start." When they got home, Jaden went straight to his room and dropped onto the bed. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. The meeting, the officer's apology, his mom's words echoing in his head. That night, he pulled out his notebook. He wasn't much of a writer, but he felt like he needed to get the words out somehow. He started jotting down what he remembered from that night, not as a victim story, but as a moment that changed how he saw the world. As he wrote, he realized he wasn't just scared anymore. He was aware of how fragile safety could feel, how powerful courage could be, and how much one person's voice could matter. A few days later, something unexpected happened. His story got picked up by a national news outlet, not in a sensational way, but as part of a larger piece about reform and accountability. They showed clips from the community meeting and a short interview with his mom. The headline read, "Local mother turns pain into change." At school, things felt different now. People still recognized him, but the looks had changed. Instead of curiosity, there was respect. Even some teachers quietly told him they were proud of how he handled everything. One afternoon, his history teacher asked if he'd be willing to speak in class about his experience. Jaden hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. When the day came, he stood at the front of the classroom, nervous but steady. "I don't really like attention," he began, "but I learned something important. Sometimes things happen that make you feel small and scared. But if you stay quiet, nothing changes. My mom always says courage isn't about fighting, it's about standing your ground when it matters." The room was silent as he spoke. When he finished, everyone clapped softly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it felt real. After class, one of his classmates, a quiet boy who rarely spoke, came up to him. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Thanks for saying all that. I got stopped once too, walking home. I never told anyone. It helps knowing I'm not the only one." Jaden smiled. "You're not." That night when he told his mom about it, she smiled too. "That's how change starts," she said. "One conversation at a time." But not everything was easy after that. A few people online still left nasty comments under the videos. Some said it was exaggerated, others questioned the story. Jaden read them once, then decided not to waste his time. His mom had told him, "You can't control how people see you, only how you carry yourself." So he focused on that. Weeks passed. The investigation concluded with an official report. The officers involved received disciplinary action and mandatory retraining. It wasn't everything his mom wanted, but it was more than most cases ever got. The department also introduced new community outreach programs, and Lisa, though she never sought attention, was quietly asked to help design them. For Jaden, life slowly returned to normal, though it never felt exactly the same. He still played basketball, still walked home some days, but now every small thing, a friendly wave from a neighbor, a smile from a stranger, felt a little more meaningful. One afternoon, he saw the same officer who had apologized at the meeting, standing outside a coffee shop near downtown. Their eyes met briefly. For a second, Jaden thought about walking away, but the officer gave a small nod. Jaden nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. Later that evening, as the sun set, Jaden and his mom sat on the porch together. The sky was streaked with orange and purple. For once, everything felt quiet and peaceful. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think my job was about catching bad guys. But it's more than that. It's about changing what people believe is normal." Jaden leaned back in his chair. "You did that, Mom?" She looked at him with a small smile. "No, we did." He smiled too, watching the light fade. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel defined by that night. He felt stronger, more certain of who he was and what he stood for. And as the world around them began to move on, Jaden knew one thing for sure. The story that began with fear was turning into something far bigger than either of them had imagined. It was turning into hope. The months after the meeting felt like a new beginning, not just for Jaden and his mom, but for the whole neighborhood. The story that had once been whispered about in shock was now spoken of with pride. People started realizing that something powerful had come out of a painful night. Jaden noticed it first at school. His classmates began talking about police reform in their social studies projects, and teachers used his story as an example of courage and resilience. It wasn't about victimhood anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even when you're scared. But at home, things were still quiet. His mom kept working long hours. She was part of a new initiative between the FBI and the local police department, focused on building trust in communities. Jayden often found her at the dining table after dinner, surrounded by reports, her laptop open, her eyes tired but determined. One evening, he walked in and found her deep in conversation on a video call. Her tone was steady, but her expression looked heavy. When she ended the call, he asked softly, "Tough day?" She gave a small smile. "Always. Change takes time, Jay." He sat down across from her. "You ever get tired of it?" "Every day," she said with a laugh. "But then I remember why I started. People don't listen unless someone makes them, and sometimes that someone has to be us." He didn't know what to say, but he felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was time he started doing something too, something that mattered. A week later, his school counselor called him in for a talk. She had seen the news about his story and wanted to know if he'd be willing to help lead a new student group. "We're calling it Voices for Change," she said. "A safe space for students to talk about fairness, community, and how to handle tough situations. You'd be a great person to help get it started." Jayden wasn't sure at first. He didn't think of himself as a leader. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He remembered how alone he had felt that night, how helpless it was to have no voice. Maybe this was his way to make sure no one else felt that again. The first meeting had only 6 students. They sat in a small classroom after school, shy and uncertain. But as the days went on, more people joined. Some shared their own experiences, not just with police, but with being judged, misunderstood, or overlooked. One girl talked about how people treated her differently because of her accent. Another boy said he felt invisible most of the time, like no one noticed him unless he messed up. Jayden listened carefully. He didn't always have advice, but he realized something powerful. Sometimes people didn't need answers, they just needed to be heard. Word spread quickly. Within 2 months, the group grew to nearly 50 students. The principal even gave them permission to hold an assembly. Jayden stood at the front of the auditorium, his heart pounding. The stage lights were hot and hundreds of eyes were on him. "I used to think staying quiet made me safe," he began. "But silence doesn't protect you. It just hides the truth. When something's wrong, you have to speak up. Not because you're fearless, but because staying silent hurts more." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. For the first time, Jayden realized his story wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what came after. At home that night, he told his mom about the assembly. She smiled proudly. "You're making something good out of something hard," she said. "That's the real power." Then she leaned forward. "Actually, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. The department's starting a new community program. It's a partnership between law enforcement and local schools to build understanding through conversation. They want young voices involved." "I think you'd be perfect," Jayden blinked. "You mean like me? Working with cops?" She nodded. "Not all cops are bad, Jay. Some just never get the chance to see the other side. Maybe you can help change that." He thought about it for a while. The memory of that night still stung, but he knew she was right. If he wanted change, he had to be part of it. So he agreed. The first meeting was awkward. The officers tried to be friendly, but everyone could feel the tension. Jayden sat across from a man in uniform, who reminded him of the officer who had stopped him months earlier. His stomach tightened, but then something unexpected happened. The officer spoke first. "I heard about your story," he said quietly. "I've been on the force for 15 years. I've made mistakes too. We all have. But I'm here because I want to learn. We need to do better." Jayden nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," he said. "I just want people to see us, not as suspects or threats, but as humans." The man smiled slightly. "That's fair." Over the next few weeks, the program took shape. They held small workshops where students and officers shared experiences, fears, and hopes. Some of the conversations were emotional, some were uncomfortable, but they were real, and that's what mattered most. One evening, during a session at a community center, an older officer admitted, "We're trained to look for danger. Sometimes that makes us see it where it isn't. Hearing you kids talk, it reminds me what we forget sometimes, that you're just kids." Jayden looked around the room and realized everyone was listening. Really listening. The kind of listening that leads to change. After one of those sessions, a local journalist interviewed Jayden and his mom for a follow-up piece. When she asked Jayden what he hoped for, He thought for a long moment before answering. "I just want people to stop being afraid of each other," he said. "That's where all this starts, and with fear." The article went viral again, but this time the response felt different. Instead of anger and blame, there was hope. People shared stories of their own, stories of empathy and progress. Even some officers reached out online, saying they'd started similar programs in their own cities after reading about Jaden's experience. His mom showed him one message from a department in another state. The officer had written, "Your story made me rethink how I approach my job. Thank you for opening my eyes." Jaden couldn't believe it. Something that had once felt like the worst moment of his life was now changing lives far beyond his own city. But with all the attention came pressure. There were still people who said things like, "You're just lucky your mom's an agent," or "This wouldn't happen for anyone else." Those words hurt, but Jaden learned to focus on the good. He told himself that change doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to start somewhere. As months passed, his mom was invited to speak at conferences and community events. Jaden sometimes joined her on stage, sharing his side of the story. They became a symbol, not of anger but of understanding. One night after an event, they drove home in silence, both tired but content. The city lights blurred past the windows. His mom finally said, "You know, I used to worry that what happened would break you, but it did the opposite. It made you stronger." Jaden looked out the window and smiled faintly. "It made both of us stronger." She reached over and squeezed his hand. Back at home, Jaden sat on the porch again, the same place where months ago he'd sat in silence, unsure of what would come next. Now everything felt different. He could hear kids laughing in the street, the hum of cars passing by, and the soft breeze through the trees. The world hadn't changed completely, but it was changing. He thought about the people he'd met, the officers who wanted to learn, the students who found their voices, the neighbors who now waved with genuine warmth. For the first time, the future didn't feel heavy with fear. It felt wide open. A few days later, his mom came home with a surprise. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was an invitation, a community award ceremony. "They're honoring you," she said, smiling. Jaden stared at it, stunned. "Me? Why?" "For your courage," she said. "For using your story to help others." At the ceremony, when he walked on stage to accept the award, the crowd stood and applauded. Among them were officers, students, and neighbors. People who not long ago might never have shared the same room. Jaden didn't give a long speech. He just said, "I'm grateful. But this isn't just my story. It's everyone's. We all have a part to play in making things better." The applause that followed wasn't just for him. It was for every person who had chosen to listen, learn, and change. Later that night, as they drove home again, his mom turned to him and said, "You know, when all this started, I thought it would be the hardest chapter of our lives. But maybe it's just the beginning of something bigger." Jaden nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe it is." And in that moment, with the city lights shining ahead and his mother beside him, he believed it. Months passed since the award ceremony, and life began to find its rhythm again. Jaden went back to being a regular high school senior, juggling classes, basketball, and college applications. But something in him had changed forever. The quiet boy who once walked home with his head down was now confident, calm, and thoughtful. He wasn't trying to be a hero or a symbol. He just wanted to live in a world where people could see each other for who they truly were. His mother noticed it too. She often watched him from the kitchen window as he talked with neighborhood kids, helping them with homework or just listening to their stories. He never bragged about what he had done. He just kept moving forward, trying to make things a little better around him every day. One weekend morning, while they were having breakfast, his mom received an email that made her pause. She looked at the screen for a long time before speaking. "It's from the department," she said slowly. Jaden looked up. "Good or bad?" She smiled faintly. "Good, I think. They want me to lead a new national program. It's about bridging communities and law enforcement through education. They want to take what we started here and build it across the country." Jaden grinned. "That's amazing, Mom." She nodded, but her voice softened. "It's a big responsibility. I'll have to travel a lot, but I think this could really make a difference," he smiled. "Then you have to do it." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're a big part of why this is happening, you know." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I just told my story. And that's all it takes sometimes," she said. telling the truth even when it hurts. That night, Jaden sat alone in his room, scrolling through old videos of the incident and all that followed. It still hurt to watch, but he could see now how far they'd come. The comments were filled with messages of support, people sharing their own experiences and how his courage had inspired them to speak up, too. He realized that pain, when shared honestly, could become something powerful, something that healed others. Over the next few months, his mom began traveling to different states, helping police departments and community leaders start dialogue programs. Each trip brought new stories, new faces, and new lessons. Sometimes she called Jaden at night from a hotel room, her voice tired but full of hope. "You should see the people I meet," she would say. "Officers who never thought about what fear feels like on the other side, and parents who finally get to be heard." It's slow, but it's working. Jaden loved hearing that. He felt proud of her, but also proud of himself, for choosing not to be bitter, for choosing to grow instead. One afternoon, he got a call from the local community center. They were organizing a youth leadership conference and wanted him to be the keynote speaker. At first, he hesitated. "I don't know," he told his mom later that night. "I'm not really a speaker," she laughed gently. "You've been speaking since the day you decided not to stay silent." "You just didn't notice," he smiled. "What should I even say?" "Say the truth," she said. "Say what you wish someone had told you back then." When the day came, Jaden stood on the small stage, looking at the faces in front of him. Students, teachers, parents, even a few local officers who had come to listen. He took a deep breath and began. "I used to think life was about staying out of trouble, keeping your head down, not drawing attention. But I learned something. Being silent doesn't protect you. It just hides your story. The night I was stopped, I thought everything was ending. But it was actually the beginning. Because that night showed me something important. That one bad moment doesn't define who you are. What defines you is how you rise after it." He paused, scanning the room. Everyone was listening closely. "We can't control what happens to us," he said, "but we can control what we do with it. We can let it make us angry, or we can let it make us stronger. I chose to grow. And every time you choose to speak with kindness, to listen with patience, or to stand up for someone who can't, you're choosing the same thing." When he finished, the entire room stood up and applauded. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Jaden smiled shyly, feeling both relief and peace. It wasn't about fame or attention. It was about connection. After the speech, one of the officers who had attended came up to him. "I just wanted to say," the man said quietly, "your story really hit home. I have a teenage son. I want him to grow up in a better world than this. And I realize that starts with me." Jaden shook his hand. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "That means a lot." Weeks later, his mother returned home from another trip. She looked tired, but her smile was brighter than ever. "We're making progress," she said. "It's slow, but people are listening. The more we talk, the more we understand each other." They sat on the porch together that evening, the sun setting over their quiet street. The air was warm and soft. For the first time in a long while, Jaden felt like everything was exactly where it should be. "You ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. His mom nodded. "I do. I wish it hadn't happened, but maybe it had to. Sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that open our eyes." Jaden thought about that for a while. "You think things will really change?" She smiled. "Maybe not overnight. But every person who learns something new, every heart that opens a little, it all adds up. Change starts small, Jay, but it grows." Her words stayed with him. A few months later, Jaden graduated high school. The ceremony was outdoors, filled with proud families and laughter. When his name was called, he walked across the stage with his head high, his mother cheering from the front row. Afterward, she hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "So did you," he said back. That summer, Jaden started volunteering full-time at the community center. He led workshops for kids about communication, confidence, and understanding their rights. He used his experience not to relive the pain, but to guide others through theirs. Some of the younger boys looked up to him like an older brother. They would ask, "How did you stay so calm?" "Weren't you scared?" He would smile and say, "Of course I was scared." But sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are. The program kept growing. They partnered with local police, who started sending officers to talk with students. Slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By the end of the year, Jaden and his mother were invited to Washington, D.C. for a national summit on youth justice. When they arrived, they were surprised to see how many people already knew their story. There were reporters, activists, and families from all over the country who had been inspired by what they had done. During the event, Jaden sat quietly as his mom spoke on stage. She talked about empathy, accountability, and the importance of seeing people, not stereotypes. Her words carried weight not because she was powerful, but because she had lived them. When she finished, the host invited Jaden up to join her. The crowd clapped as he walked on stage. He didn't have a prepared speech this time. He just looked at everyone and said, "I'm just a kid who wanted to make it home that night. I never thought my story would go this far. But if it can help one person think differently, then it was worth it." The audience stood again, clapping not just for him but for what he represented: understanding, forgiveness, and hope. That night, as they walked out of the building, his mom looked up at the bright city lights and smiled. "We did something good," she said softly. Jaden nodded. "We did something real." When they returned home, life slowly went back to normal. But nothing was truly the same. Their story had become a symbol of what could happen when people listened instead of judged. When courage met compassion. Years later, Jaden would look back on that night and realize it had shaped everything: his choices, his values, even his future. He went on to study criminal justice and eventually worked to create policies that focused on fairness and community education. He didn't do it for fame or recognition. He did it for that scared boy he once was and for every kid who deserved to walk home without fear. Sometimes when he visited his mom, they would sit on that same porch again, just like they used to. The world was still far from perfect, but it was better than before. And every time the evening breeze passed by carrying the soft hum of the city, Jaden felt something he hadn't felt that night long ago: peace. He had learned that change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in conversations, in acts of understanding. And though the journey had started with fear, it had ended with hope. A quiet, steady hope that refused to fade. And that hope, more than anything else, was the legacy they had built together.